Okay, so today's daf yomi is Bava Basra daf Kuf Dal, Bava Basra 104. Today's daf yomi, this very emotional day, we dedicate it for the Chayalim, for the Shvuyim, Hashmir for Am Yisrael, and this Eis Tzara. We're going to start with the Mishnah on 103b. The Mishnah tells us that if a person says, Beis Kur Afar Ani Mochalcha, Mida B'Chava, if a person says, I'm selling you this base core of earth, this field of earth, and I'm selling you as measured by the rope, then piches kol shehu yanake, that if he doesn't sell as much, if he sells less, he can deduct from the price because he said it's going to be exact. Hotzir kol shehu, if he said if he adds on too much field, yachzir, then the person who bought it has to return it. Amar hein chaser hein yaser. Then if he sells it more or less this amount, if he says I'm selling it more or less, then afilu piches rovo aseo hosi rovo aseo igio. Then he has up until 1/4 of a kav for each sale, which is for a base core 7.5 kavim, because there are 30 son a base core. Yoser mikan yasa cheshbon. If it's more than that, he has to make a calculation. Well, what does the purchaser have to return? Mos, he has to return money. Because if he returns the field, then what's this guy going to do with just a small parcel of a field? Imratza machzir will karka, but if the seller wants, he could get the real estate back. Why does it say that he gives him back money? To say that the seller has this upper hand that he could demand the cash back instead of the real estate. Shemshir besada beis tisha kavin, because if there would be, however, left over 9 kavin or in a field, ubegina, nagina, a garden which requires more water, beis chatzi kav, half a kav, ukediva Rabbi Akiva beis rova, or according to Rabbi Akiva quarter then machzir as a karka, and then he would return to him the real estate. Not only is he returning the extra quarter kav that he took, but el machzir as kol hamosar, but he's going to return everything, meaning say not just the difference from 7.5 to 9. He doesn't just add from 7.5 to 9, but rather the entire 9 is what he has to return. So now the Gemara asks the question: he buy a little base course stama. Let's say he doesn't say mida b'chavel or hein chaser and yaser. He doesn't say exactly by the rope, or he doesn't say more or less. So then, what is the law? He just says base core. What does that mean? So Tashma, Gemara says, let's try and bring a proof from our Mishnah. Base core offer ani mochercha mida b'chavel. So if it says in our Mishnah, it says if he sells a base core, I'm selling to you measured by the rope, then pachos kol shehu. Then if it's less than that, if he sold him less than that, yinake, he has to deduct from the price. Yes, or kol shehu, but if it's more than that, yachzir, then the purchaser has to return it, which implies hastama. But that means if he didn't say measured by the rope, if he just said I'm selling you a base core, so from our Mishnah, it will imply Hein Cheser, yeah, Hein Yeser Dami. It's like he sold more or less. So from the first clause of our Mishnah implies that the stam statement, base score, is like more or less. But what about the next clause of our Mishnah? Ema say, but the next clause says, Amar lo, Hein Cheser Hein Yeser. If he says to him, I'm selling to you more or less, and afilu piches rovo asea o hosi rovo asea igio. If he says I'm selling to you more or less, then even if he sold him, if he says I'm selling to you more or less, then even if he sold to him piches rovo asea or hosi rovo asea, then even if he sold him less than a quarter kav or more than a quarter, even if he sold him less than a quarter kav for each sale, or hosi rovo asea, or he says a little bit extra, but it's still under the ratio of a quarter kav for sale, it's a valid sale. Hastama. This would imply that if it was exactly if he didn't specify, then it would be committed b'chavel dami. It would be like the rope. So, like you said, I'm selling 2 by the measure for each rope. So, from our Mishnah, you can't imply anything. I'm like, since our Mishnah can be read either direction, can't learn anything from our Mishnah. Tashma, the Gemara says, let's try and determine it from the following brisa. Brisa says 3 expressions: base core afar ani mochacha, kibes core afar ani mochacha, Ein chayser and yaser ani mokorcha. So he uses one of these expressions. It just says, I'm selling you a base score without specifying, or like a base score, or he says more or less like a base score. And I feel then it's a valid sale as long as it's the discrepancy is less than a quarter kaf for each seah, which implies almost stama, since it uses the expression base score and then it says hein chaser yoser, implies that the base score, the stam statement is like hein chaser and yeser. Almost stama nami hein chaser and yeser dami. So we see from here that they're not, that just baseline statement I'm selling you base score means more or less. Gemara says no, we're not going to be able to derive that. Why? Some Pirushi Kamafarish. There we could be interpreting the brisa that the brisa is being explained. Means to say, Ezu base core, Shahi Kiv core. What is a base core that is like a base core? What is a base core? What does it mean? Ezu base core. What does it mean when it say that it's a base core, but it doesn't mean it's an exactly base core? It means it's just like a base core, but not exactly base core. That's going to Amrlayim Chaser and Yasser. That's when he says this expression more or less. So you can interpret the brisa that way, and you don't have to interpret it as the anonymous statement is equal to, or as the baseline statement is equal to Hein Chaser and Yasser. Gemara says, no, Ma'askefar Rashi. Rashi challenges that interpretation. If that's the case, that these are really one statement explaining each other, then why does it say I sell to you 3 times? Meaning to say, why does it explain? Why does it have to specify? It's all one statement that is explaining the earlier one. So it must be that these are 3 separate statements. We learn from here that if he doesn't specify, it means like he's saying more or less. So now the Mishnah said, what does the purchaser return to him? He returns to him money if that's what the seller wants, because the seller doesn't want to be stuck with a smaller portion of land. So the Gemara asked the question, meaning to say we give the advantage to the seller. The seller says, I don't want to be stuck with a small piece of land, so therefore you have to give me back the money. But we don't say we want to strengthen the position of the purchaser. But didn't we learn in the Brisa? Let's say for each core, i.e., for each 30 seya, you have less than 7.5 kavan discrepancy. Oh, hosier, you gave him less. You gave him less, but it was less than up to 7.5. Oh, hosier, you gave him more, but it was up to shiva kavan umechzel core. It's a valid sale. You can have a discrepancy in either direction of 7.5 kavan, but yoser kavan. But if it's more than that, kofin is a mocher core. We force the seller to sell it and veselkech likach, and we more than that, we forced the seller to sell kofanas amocher limkor veselkech likach, and we forced the purchaser to buy it. So we see from here, under these circumstances, that we're going to say that we're also favoring we're favoring the purchaser as well. Meaning to say that, first of all, we force the purchaser to purchase it. That's like our Mishnah, that we say you have to give him the cash, just like our Mishnah. But we also force the seller to sell it, that even though the seller says, I want to get my money back, nevertheless, he doesn't, basically, even if the seller says, I want to get my real estate back, he only gets the money. And the reason is because just like the Chachamim made a takana that we can't stick the seller with a small piece of property, so too the Chachamim made a takana that we can't stick with the purchaser, with the seller having a small piece of property right on his property, and so therefore he has the right to access it, and this will be very annoying for the purchaser. So therefore, if it's more than that, we force the seller to sell. We say you have to sell the person the money, and we force the purchaser to purchase, to give him cash, meaning to say that just like and this is a question on our Mishnah, because our Mishnah says we just strengthen the position of the seller, but here we're saying we strengthen the position of the purchaser. So the Gemara says no. Hasam, there we have a different scenario. This is the way the Rashbam explains it. It could go into have a Yakira Meikar. The property was more expensive initially, Vizal, and now it's gone down in price. So the property is no longer worth the same amount of money. And Hashadam Rinale, now that we say to him, so now that we say this to him, that basically we say to the seller, the purchaser, even though the seller has the right to demand the cash back, the purchaser can say to the seller, that if you're going to give him the money, then you have to give it to him only then like the cheaper price. So meaning to say that the seller has the right to demand money, but he only at the cheaper price of the real estate, not at the more expensive. Gemara says, but don't we say that he gives it at the price of the purchase and not necessarily at the cheaper price? So Gemara explains, no, Hasam going to Avale Zula Meikara, yeah, when does he get to give it to him at the cheaper price? When it was initially cheaper and it's more expensive now, meaning to say the seller has the right to demand cash, but the purchaser has the right to pick which value he wants to give it back at, either at the price, whenever it was the cheapest, either at the price it was sold or at the price that it is now. So the Gemara says, and our Mishnah said, Shemshir Basada base test Kavan, that it said if you had left over in the field 9 kavin that was extra, machzir was a karka. Meaning to say, our Mishnah had said that if it was less than 7.5 kavin, the discrepancy, then we could say under those circumstances, you're entitled to the extra money. But if it was 9 kavin, then we're going to say that he returns the real estate, because he's saying this is a significant amount of real estate, and so we say he returns it under those circumstances. So this amount that we say that if there is a discrepancy in the sale of 9 kavin, and then the purchaser can return the real estate. So there's 2 ways to look at this 9 kavin. Is this just an objective amount? That's a significant amount, or do we say it proportionally based upon the ratio of 9 kavin for 30 seah? But if it will be a much larger amount of field, then we're going to say, then it would have to be a much bigger amount of field that you have to return. So that's the dispute amongst the sages. Amar Afuna Teis Kavin Sha'amru. This 9 kavin that they said that if you have the 9 kavin, you return the land itself, and he doesn't return the money, and this amount the discrepancy is not waived. That's a field of bika gadol. Even if it's a very, very large field, let's say thousands and thousands of acres, we still, if there's a 9 kavin discrepancy amount, which is relatively small, you still return this area to the seller. Rav Nachman Amar, no saying shivas kavin u'mechzel chol kor v'kor. Nachman says no. It's based upon proportionality, that each specific core, which each specific parcel of field, this is a core, a field that can produce a core, is allowed a discrepancy in the sale of 7.5 kavin, and so that's proportionality. The ika milsa yasera, and if there will be even more than that, Letitia's kavin, that it will combine to the Tisha's kavin, meaning to say that we're looking at it based upon all of the fields sold, and so therefore we're going to just calculate it based upon that logic, not 9 kavin for all the field you sold, but the discrepancy of up to 9 kavin for every 30 seah that you sold. Then if you have that ratio, then you can return the property. Other than that, we're going to say it's too small amount of land, and he can demand the cash back. So Eisvei Rav Rav Nachman, so Gemara is going to ask the same question 3 times from our Mishnah. What about the fact that it says in our Mishnah, Shem Shir Besada Beis Tishas Kavin, so that if he left over in the field 9 kavin, that he's entitled to the real estate back? Isn't that talking about a case that's right? Isn't our Mishnah talking about a case where he sold not 1 core but 2 core, 60 seah? Gemara says no, our Mishnah is not talking about that case. There's a core. And what about a garden? Ubagina Beis Chatzikav Lav Dezabon. Isn't it talking about a case where he sold him 2 seah for the garden? No, Dezabon seah. No, he sold him 1. Rabbi Akiva Beis Rova, my love, does that why he said? No, he sold them to Zemway Chatzis. So the Gemara asks the same question 3 times, which is, doesn't our Mishnah imply that we're talking about a large amount, and therefore it's a proof? It's a proof for basically and therefore it's a proof for Rav Huna, and so therefore Rav Nachman would say no, it's talking about where it told him where he told him just one amount and one core, one half sand. So therefore, that's why it's limited to that 9 kavin or that half a seah. So now the Gemara says, "By Rav Ashi, sada v'nasis gina, or gina v'nasis sada mai." So now we have a case which we said that there are different amounts of discrepancy allowed based upon whether it's a field, which requires less water, or a garden, which requires more water. Let's say at a certain point, and the commentaries dispute exactly what the point is, but let's say it was a field and it became a garden, or a garden it became a field. So the property switched its classification. So the Gemara leaves this question unresolved. Teku. So since the question is unresolved, burden of proof rests upon the one who wants to get the money. So we leave that question unresolved as a teku. So the Gemara says, Tana, Amaya Samach. So we have so the Gemara now says the following scenarios. We learned in the Bryce. So let's say we learned in the Mishnah that if the extra amount that he added in the field was 9 kavim, then the real estate goes back. But if it's not, then the seller can demand the money back, meaning say if it's between 7.5 and 9, he can demand the money back because the land is too small to force him to get it and work it. And what's he going to do with it? So he could just demand the cash back. But let's say this small amount of land, it was, let's say, the field that he sold to the purchaser was samach wasadeo, that the field that the seller sold, he had another field next to it. Afilu kolshu, even if he just added on to the 7.5 kavin just a little bit, then we're going to return the real estate, because then the seller can't say, what am I going to do with this small amount of land? Because he can work the land because it's next to his other property. It's adjoining his other property. And so therefore, he can't say, oh, I demand the cash because he has another property right there. So now the Gemara asks a series of questions. I'm just going to end and take a Bava Basra. But yeah, let's say it's next to his land, but Bor Ma'oshatavsik, but he has a pit in between this parcel being returned and his existing land, so you can't plow it together. Or Amas Amayim, where you have a stream going back, Ma'oshatavsik. Does that interrupt it? Or Derech Haram, where there's a public road in between, Ma'oshatavsik. Or Rikhba de Dikla, or let's say there's palm trees running down the middle between the parcel that wants to be returned and his old parcel. So in all these cases, Amara says, take it. We leave these questions unresolved. We leave them unresolved. And so we had said that if there's an entitlement, and I don't know if it's entitlement is the right word, that's a dispute, but there's an amount where if there's a discrepancy of this amount, the sale is not its sale still goes through. That's up to a quarter kav for each. Say 7.5 kavim for a core. So let's say he went over it. He went, let's say, 8 kavim per core. So then he doesn't only return the extra half kav, he returns all all the discrepancy. But the Mishnah's language is unusual because it doesn't only return the extra quarter kav that he took per seah, but rather he returns all the extra. So the Gemara says, klapi lai. The language is the opposite of what it should be. Tani, meaning to say, it should say, he not only returns the extra, but he returns all the quarter kavim. So the Gemara says, Tani Rabban bar Rav Nachman, lo es hamotzer bava machzir lo, ela es kol haravayin kol. He doesn't only return, we change the expression, change the way it says it. He doesn't only return the moser, he doesn't only return the extra, but he returns all the quarter kavin, which is basically it's all canceled. So now we're up to the next Mishnah. The Mishnah tells us actually a very powerful point, but I'm going to stop the recording.